Right. Great. So shall we begin? Yes. So welcome to New Perspectives on Integral and Transformational Learning, hosted by our university and Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center in Surat and in Fountain Inn, South Carolina. It is a platform for the exploration of new perspectives in integral education, social development, integral yoga topics, and art and culture. Our aim is to facilitate presentations and interactions of different experts and researchers in diverse fields of endeavor, creating an interdisciplinary and interactive platform where all perspectives may find their true place, leading to more harmonious and comprehensive ways of living. Today is a roundtable on integral education in Auroville. In its charter, Auroville was envisioned as a place of unending education, constant progress, and a youth that never ages. Free progress is a term coined by the mother. She spoke of it as a progress guided by the soul and not subjected to habits, conventions, and preconceived ideas. In its numerous experiments in learning and teaching, to what extent has Auroville been able to bring these great ideas to life and action? Jean-Yves and Deepti will speak of their experiments in the field of education and their experiences working with Auroville teenagers in the last school. Jean-Yves uh, grew up in France, where he studied political sciences. He has been living in Auroville since 1993, as a researcher and teacher of history, sociology, and later on in Sanskrit language and literature, in the light of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. For more than 2 decades at Last School, which is a secondary school of Auroville. Deepti Tewari is a teacher and educationist in Auroville schools for 35 years. She has worked in the Last School. She has written the Matrimandir journals and more recently explored Auroville's international dimensions through Bhavishyate, the Bharat Nivas journal. I would propose that every panelist would have 15 minutes for their presentation and then 30 minutes for question and answer session. Please post your questions into question and answers box so we would address them at the end of their presentations. So I invite Deepti Tewari first to speak about integral education in Auroville, its vision, and maybe challenges. Please, Deepti.
Good evening and good morning, depending on which part of the world you're in. I'm going to cover 3 aspects. Actually, Jean-Yves and I will share what we are saying because we have been colleagues for many years. And in Auroville, because it's an experiment in collective brotherhood, we get to know each other much more than just being colleagues. There is a sort of a inner dimension to the connections. And if Auroville exists after so many years, it's because of this inner scaffolding. So I'd like to introduce our listeners to what was this scaffolding. In the 50s, Mother invited everyone who was turned to Sri Aurobindo to a great adventure. And then she said, in this adventure, we are not going to repeat what others do. It's a pathway into the unknown, into the unforeseen. And if you like such an adventure, come join. And we have to create everything anew. Well, that's the basis of Auroville. We cannot build what we are doing in Auroville on the structures that humanity has created for millennia and recently, since the modern age, the structures that have been created. Auroville begins in some ways where all that stops. In 66, when she was speaking about, she's speaking about many things, but she begins to speak about Auroville. And she says, humanity is not the last rung of terrestrial creation. Evolution continues, and humanity as a species will be surpassed. She ties Auroville to this journey of surpassing the human condition. So what we are trying to do is in Auroville is not create an ameliorated human being. No, we have to take apart what we assume to be the best. We have to reinvent that into new forms. She says it's a new creation. It needs new forms. It needs new methodology. But it isn't something that you do with the mind. She says for millennia, we have developed outer means. I'm going to read that. For millennia, we have developed outer means, outer instruments, outer techniques of living. And finally, those means and techniques are crushing us. In the time of COVID, that's pretty clear. I'm again quoting, the sign of the new humanity is a reversal of perspective and the understanding that the inner knowledge and the inner technique can change the world and master it without crushing it. So somehow Auroville has to find a way to transmute things without destroying. If you look at the way humanity has progressed, we have, the centrifugal and the centripetal forces. Revolutions are destructive very much. Now, can we create a change in Auroville without a revolutionary, even a crushing movement? So she says, again, I'm quoting her, Auroville is the place where the new way of life is being worked out. It is a center of accelerated evolution where man must begin to change his world through the power of the inner spirit. So the question that confronts any one of us who's chosen to be in Auroville is, what is this inner spirit? If you look at India, it's probably the country in the world that has explored the dimensions of the inner spirit more than any other country in the world. Sri Aurobindo speaks about this repeatedly in his writings. But unfortunately, the Indian exploration for the last millennia or two has turned away from life. In Auroville, we are more than totally turned towards life. She says, I want life itself growing and perfecting itself, each one in his or her own way, above all, not the same size for everybody. Now, these are idea forces that if you're wanting to create any kind of program in Auroville, and it's nothing to do with education alone, or you could argue that all of Auroville is a great educational experiment. When you look at the charter, when you look at to be a true Aurovillian, and when you look at some of these texts that Mother has put forward, they're clearly about self-finding, self-education, self-evolution. Therefore, the basis of Auroville, the last message she gave to Auroville is a place for karma yoga. Everyone must take a work and do it as a yoga. So whether you're a teacher in a school, whether you're working in any of the units of Auroville, you're on an educational journey. It's all life. Actually, Sri Aurobindo's subtext for the synthesis of yoga is all life is yoga. If you think of the yoga systems in India, they have tended to deny life and therefore deny the power that life gives. Well, Auroville has to embrace that. And I can assure you that's difficult. So the journey of Auroville has been difficult. So now I'm going to come to the way educational processes have manifested, specifically in relation to those who needed schooling. Actually, we are all students and we are all in the great school of life, but Auroville needed to organize schooling. Right at the beginning, when Auroville was a year or two old, some of the early Aurovillians asked Mother, can we send our kids to the ashram school? She said, no, Auroville must create its own system, and buildings were started. Now, she gave names and people assigned them to buildings. But if you listen to the names, That's the only thing we have in writing. She starts with something called last school. That's why our school is called last school. So you have a last school, then you have after school in 3 stages, 1, 2, 3. Then you have something called super school, and you finally have no school. So for many years, people thought these were the names of buildings, and there is a building in Aspiration which is called last school. But if you look at the way these names are laid out, there's a kind of a psychological progression. The first school you go to is your last school. And then you're already in after school and then super school. And finally, when life itself is growing and perfecting itself, you're in the no school, which is Auroville. So all of us, teachers and students, are growing beings seeking to find the truth of our being, which Sri Aurobindo in Savitri describes beautifully as the unfelt self within, who is the guide, the unknown self above, who is the goal. Now, even a little baby in Auroville is a soul, a psychic being. And that is the key for our education. Can this psychic being be kept in front? And in one of Mother's texts, which she called The Dream, which she wrote for the International Center of Education that she started in the ashram, she talked about, can children grow up in contact with their soul? That education should not be given for certificates and posts, but to awaken faculties and develop new ones. It's as if we live in the outward corner of our house of being, and there are spaces, large, vast spaces that are unexplored. So Auroville is a place to explore this. Well, the first school started in Aspiration, and everyone of school-going age used to come there. But given that Auroville was trying to find itself, and there is a philosophical approach which says, not this, neti, neti. And in the early years, we did that a little bit too much. So the Aurovillians knew what they didn't want. They didn't know what they want, so they closed the schools. So there was a kind of a 10-year hiatus where young people who wanted to learn had to find people to teach them. I remember my first class was with one youngster who said, can you teach me English? And she would come to my hut in Aspiration in the 70s. And there were kids who grew up without school. By the time we got to the 80s, let's say 1985, the teenagers had had enough. They said, stop experimenting with us, give us a school. And that's how the present last school that Jean-Yves and I are part of was reborn, so to say, in that same campus that Mother had launched in her lifetime. And so last school was the first so-called secondary school that was started on a very strong demand of the teenagers of Auroville. Now this last school had a lovely first few years because the kids had been left very wild, so they were responding to the discipline, they were ready to be structured, and we created a wonderful program. We discovered very quickly that you could not approach the subjects in the way normal education does. So for instance, the question, what kind of history do we teach kids? And we realized, well, no textbook that exists in the world is valid for the kind of historical perspective that we need to create in Auroville. It's there in Sri Aurobindo's book, his Social and Political Thought, The Human Cycle particularly. But we were all students ourselves. So I remember the first history classes, we divided the world amongst 8 of us, and each of us prepared our classes. I got ancient India, for instance, and somebody else took ancient Greece, and George Panfrecken took ancient Rome. And we would all attend each other's classes, plus all the kids. So it was like a ferment of learning. The other thing we discovered was that very often when you're teaching, you talk about some idea that you find in a great book of literature, and the kids have no comprehension of it. Because you talk about sin and virtue, the Auroville kids grew up without sin and virtue. They grew up totally free. The core truth of Auroville is freedom. So we started a course of comparative religions. So in some ways, we were discovering the way to go as we were doing. Solvitur ambulando. As we were doing, we said, oh, this is missing and that is missing. So this happened in the late 80s, but again, this idea that schooling should not happen. In 1992, various people in the collectivity intervened and closed our school down. And so for a week, they took over the school. There was a kind of a cultural revolution. The teachers are not doing the right thing. They're doing too much to do with the mind. The mind is a bad word. Alors, we could not continue like that. Well, the kids said, give us back our school. So a week later, we were back in school, but everything was different. And then we began to question, because finally, when things happen in Auroville, the fact that they can happen means that there is something in the life energy that allows it to happen. You have to ask yourself why this is happening. And so we began to re-look at it. And one of the things we evolved, at that time, Jean-Yves was part of the team. One of the reasons why we can do what we've done is we've got a fabulous team. And we began to notice that the life spirit needed to be organized before you can go to the domains of the mind. But it has to be organized in absolute freedom. So we came up with this idea about the tapasya of beauty. Absolute pursuit of beauty, beauty of thought, beauty of sentiment, but in complete freedom. So we created a school where no rules are applied. And yet we tell the students who join, look, there are no rules. You're absolutely free. You're free not to come. But once you choose to come, you're committed. And there are conditions, which means regularity, being on time, and also psychologically behaving in a certain way that creates a harmonious collective. So our approach is very psychological. It's not at all academic. Because if you wish to address life, you have to do it psychologically. Now I notice my time is finished. So I will come back to India later and I must hand it over to Jean-Yves.
Thank you, Deepti. It was wonderful, wonderful to hear your inspirational talk. Finally, it's like a cleansing, streams. They're cleansing your consciousness, putting everything into right perspective, the true perception of things. So you see, we are so clogged and clouded with so many conditions, so many laws and dogmas and preferences and social conventions, that we don't even see that there can be pure stream and pure search for the truth in life. And that's what Auroville represents. And of course, there will be a difficult search, difficult kind of corners which we have to turn and so on. There will be many difficult challenges. And most probably, Jean-Yves also would mention about that if you would like. Please, Jean-Yves.
Yes, it's true that we don't prepare to any certificate
Volume.
or exam volume. I cannot. Oh,
A little louder or closer to the microphone.
We can't hear you.
Now you can hear me? You can hear me, yes? Okay. So we don't prepare to any certificate. So the reason is that if we do that, we are stuck in the program and everybody is obliged to do the same thing. And then we lose one of the most important points, which is to help the student to find their own way and their own rhythm, which is the main part. And in that sense, we are not teacher of subject, although we teach subject occasionally, but we are here mainly to help the children to grow and to know by themselves more and more precisely what they want to study, what they want to develop in themselves, what they want to become. So this is the sense of free progress. It's not the freedom to do whatever I want, it's the freedom to find out what I really want to become. It's not necessarily comfortable. For some, it's difficult. Even sometimes we have to send some of them to a more structured kind of school because it helps them to be structured when they cannot structure themselves. But for those who are ready for it, it's a help. It helps them to grow in what they are instead of growing into something they are not, like a role or a professional profile. Yes. So that's one thing we can say. The difficulties, Vladimir asked me what were the difficulties, and I had to scratch my head. Where are the difficulties? Except my own, of course. But it's true, there were a few difficulties that at the beginning, there was a kind of unbelief in the Auroville society that this was a good method. There was the idea that the kids should not be object of experiment. Their future, was at stake, so they should be able to find a job anywhere, and therefore, have a profile that can be accepted anywhere. So there was not really a consensus, even in Auroville society, that free progress education was the right thing to do. So there was a lot of pressure and belief, and for many years we have been just persisting. And then one day it was there. One day it was, we were like in possession of the thing. It was more accepted in the environment, or maybe we had just a student that we needed to do it fully. And now for us, it's a living reality, but it has not been something, it has not been a living reality since the beginning. It has taken many years of persistence for that. So a living reality is that's a very important point. Whatever we want to teach the student, it has to be a living reality for us. Otherwise, we are not credible. So generally, teachers are supposed to be specialized in their domain. But my feeling is that what is important is not a subject that we teach. What is important is the student. And we could teach, so-called teach just anything, because the important is how do we address a student so that if he's encouraged to grow, to become more self-confident and free to discover everything is possible to do. So it's much, our school is much more student-oriented than subject-oriented. Another question that I was asked to answer is how do they cope with the situation outside? When they leave Auroville, they go in the outside world. And I think in all the examples I have seen, they have managed very well, because what they have received here, however imperfect it was, it's something that helped them to be self-confident, to be able of taking initiative, to have a sense of purpose, and to feel free to choose this or that. And they were much more autonomous when they were in another context than the other students. So in that sense, it was not a handicap. It has never been a handicap for them. I think when they are awakened to the sense of what they are and what they are capable of, then they can go anywhere and they will be achievers. Yes. Now, we could think that this kind of education is possible only in a very privileged situation like Auroville, and maybe it's true. Vladimir said we cannot address education without addressing the other domains, whether it is economy or governance. And finally, our system of education is in phase with the system, social system where we live. But if we look at the future and at what is happening more and more, what is striking is there is more and more uncertainty. The future is more and more unpredictable. There are a lot of challenges coming, and on a bigger scale than ever. And there is also more complexity. So if you think of that and you ask the question, how do you prepare the youth to um, to meet an uncertain and predictable future full of challenges and complexity? What kind of education do you want? It's not the mainstream education that you find everywhere, because this is an education which aim mainly I'm making the student employable by the economy, give them skills, give them a professional profile. But the jobs that exist today will not exist in 15 years from now. So what? So we have to put the stress much more on the creativity of the student and the capacity for them to choose what they want to become by themselves, because this is how, when you touch that, you touch the the source of all the skills and all the faculties they might develop on the way. I don't know where I am with my time here. I
Yeah,
think
it's
maybe I
fine.
have still five
You
minutes.
can still
Okay.
go on
Okay.
if you want for 5 minutes.
Another important point for us is the school, the place. What is the school? It's not a place of teaching. It's a place of progress for everyone, the teachers as well as the student. So the teacher is not somebody who has a job. He's paid to have this job, to teach and then go back home. That's not sufficient to work in that school. There must be an aspiration to grow, and to grow to something we don't even know, that we have to discover. And that is the common background of all the teachers in that school. We have different methods, we have different profiles, different nature. So there is a diversity, but there is something in common. It's we come to school to become, to grow, and to grow with the students, because that's what we are, why we are on earth. Is just very simple. It's to grow as fully as possible. Yes. So it's a place, maybe a place of offering, we could say, to what we aspire to become. That would be the better definition of school, maybe. What else can I say? Self-determination, I think that's the aim for us, to make the student capable of self-determination. What we teach, history, mathematics, English, is just instrumental, circumstantial, occasional. But through all this, we always try to address this question, help them to choose what they want to be, what they want to become. But for that, it has to be something we are convinced of, and we have to become, each one of us, able to do it. I don't know if there is a universal methodology that can be applied for it, because I think it's more, as human being, how do we address other human beings, the other human beings as the students are, not as teacher with students, but as aspiring human beings to other aspiring human beings. Yes. So the more this becomes a living reality for the teachers, the more alive is the school, and the most favorable it offers an environment for the student and for their growth. This is what I would have to say.
Thank you, Jean-Yves.
Yes.
Wonderful kind of vision of growing in the school, developing faculties through the subjects. Subjects are becoming instrumental to the development of faculties and self-determination of the student, creativity, new ways of looking at things, recognizing oneself through the instruments of consciousness. Which are these subjects? Which is beautiful idea.
There is something maybe that we forgot to mention about the school, that we give a lot of importance to art, and so there are many hours just consecrated to art, because art brings to education a lot of things. There is a sense of beauty, there is a capacity to concentrate for a long time, there's a challenge of facing, the incapacity to create something or to formulate something. It's really an ideal tool of education, and it helps all the other subjects to have art in the school.
Mm, wonderful. What I see a kind of a shift from, from what we know as the third person inquiry method, which is usually academics, to the first person inquiry method, where all the subjects and facilitators and, the activities become educational for us to grow. So the first person inquiry, a growth of the consciousness of the child, or for that matter, of the adult. There is no difference between child and adult, between the facilitator, teacher in the school, and the person who discovers this. The discovery is taking place all the time among both teachers and students. And if teachers are not discovering, then what students can do, yes? So it is a mutual growth of consciousness, which is a joy of being constantly young. And that is the concept of unending education, which is happening in the class and then in life, interacting with other conscious human beings, and having that joy of growth of consciousness manifested through activities. Thank you. It's wonderful. We need this refreshed look at life. Being here abroad, seeing how life is constituted here, arranged, yeah, we can see that fresh look is very needed. We have few questions here. Deepti, if you want to add something about, you mentioned you will say something about India. So please, it's
But
time.
before we go to India, I would like to add to what Jean-Yves says.
Please.
We have all the subject domains, because what we are wanting to do is, behind the subject, there is something that is awakened. Let's say science awakens observation that leads to analytical thought. Very important to develop a discriminative, analytical rationality that observes the outside world and understands. That's one domain. There is another domain which deals with essential thought, which is philosophy. A lot of modern school systems have thrown philosophy out, but I'm not talking about speculative or logical philosophy. I am talking about a philosophy that leads to self-finding. And that's a key topic in every field of learning and teaching that takes place in law school. So the way we approach it is questions. Like we spent 3 months a couple of years ago looking at death, because somebody died and in Auroville, and that became a question in the school, and a group of youngsters began to get involved with the whole process of departure, of farewell. So we did a whole exploration of what is death. Now that's a life issue that everyone should look at. Often we don't prepare young people to understand the profound questions that life throws up. So you kind of take them through an academic schooling and you throw them out into the real world, and they're completely lost. What Jean-Yves said, our kids manage very well, is because they're doers and they know how to deal with life. They meet life head on, and the issues that they meet in life come up in the school for discussion. The third area is what Jean-Yves mentioned about art, music, poetry. It speaks to the side of you that knows, the profounder side. And that the side of dreaming, of imagining, of visioning, we value it immensely. And we give it a lot of scope for self-expression. The other thing is, we tell the kids there is no wrong question. Please ask questions, because we are set in motion with the questions. If you don't ask questions, well, how are we going to know what to tell you? Because remember, we don't have a syllabus. We have very vibrant living sessions. We also sit in kind of a circular manner, because one of the things we tell the kids is the teacher is not the fount of knowledge. Learning takes place in many ways. And learning is as much lateral. The kids can teach each other as much. And by listening to each other, so the teacher is the first listener and the first student of the classroom. The students listen to each other as much, and we build our program. We never manage to finish what we are doing because so many questions arise. Now, unfortunately, when you have an academic program based on a syllabus, even when there is a profound question that comes up from one youngster, the teacher will say, no, I have no time. Yeah, I have to finish the syllabus. Now we have total freedom in our school. We can explore the question the moment it arises, because when it arises and you respond together, you search for an answer together, that knowledge becomes invincible. So there is a very living, vibrant process. And one of the things that we demand is no boredom. The moment a kid is bored, we need to sit down together and analyze it. Why? What's going on? What's happening? So it's a very vibrant, living process. The other thing is we want collective beings. We don't want, modern education produces very selfish, self-centered, self-aggrandizing people. We want beings that are ready to serve the collective. So we encourage collective processes. We encourage kindness. That's kind of the highest position a child can have, to be kind to others, to take care of each other, to protect each other, to grow together. So, there is that Sanskrit proverb, which I think is the last verse of the Veda, Sam Gachadvam, Sam Vadvatvam. Vladimir, Jean-Yves, tell me what it is.
Samgachatvam samavadadvam samvo manansi janatam. No,
That's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. It's so inspiring, so beautiful to listen to this learning environment created, which is open. And actually Montessori also has the similar approach. They took this approach of answering the question when it arises, because in that moment the child is attentive, and if you really pay attention and really take your time, that answer is really invincible. It stays forever. It doesn't have to be remembered or something, or usually that's how we learn. We remember the answers and we think we learn. We don't learn much. Questions are more important than even answers, actually. To keep the question, to make question grow, it becomes something like exploration, aspiration to know. And knowledge arrives, knowledge comes and goes. And sometimes it is not there, so we have to wait for it, to wait for that occasion for it to come to us. This supremacy of knowledge, not of the teacher, it's very important. That the teacher is the first student, as you rightly said. This attitude changes everything. And it creates trust among learners. Among students, they trust you because you are the learner also. It's wonderful. I'm kind of very glad to hear these these concepts, in action. I know that last school had many difficulties because of, the whole trend was towards certification in Auroville, and last school was the last forepost of not accepting certification, and it was wonderful. Now we have
anybody else, Vladimir, I wouldn't teach any other way. This spoils you for any other way of teaching. This is such fun because every day is new. You discover something.
Beautiful. So we have several questions here already. You can see them in question and answers box for yourself. And if you are ready to answer for some of them, I can also voice them if you need for others, because others may not see it. What is a school day, week, semester, year like in the last school? How is free progress embodied in teachers? Just now you answered all these questions. And relations with the parents. Relations with the parents, maybe you could touch upon.
Jean-Yves?
There is also the chat box with questions there also.
Yeah, in the chat box there is also one question or two.
You want to say something about the relation with the parents?
Yes, do that. Yes. Deepti?
I'm asking you.
For the parents. Wait, listen, the parents, first they have to agree, of course, with our way of teaching, otherwise it's difficult. And then we don't go through the parents to reach the students, and we generally try to solve all of questions or problems with the student, with him directly. So the parents are not particularly present in our way of functioning. We have something else to add, Deepti?
Yes, because what we do is we tell the students that if we have an issue with you, we will talk to you. And if you give us permission, we'll talk to your parents. Because these are teenagers, they're self-developing beings. We are recognizing them. You know what Shravinder says, that there is the soul, which is a self-directing and self-developing being. Now, if we are going to evoke that, we tell the kids, we recognize that you are capable of complete responsibility for yourself. If we wish to bring in your guardians and your caregivers, we'll ask your permission. And sometimes with their agreement, we might have a conference. But otherwise, generally, the kids say, no, 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 we work it out together. So it's not as if we are excluding the parents. The parents are welcome to come and talk to us at tea time if they have a question. But we like to be upfront and open so that we'll invite the child to be present so that there is no secret adult discussion that excludes the child. Because our whole program is based on trust. And we need the kids to trust that what we represent is an aspiration towards the best that they have within them. But we are demanding that that best comes forward. So in that sense, the condition is rigorous. So we often tell the kids, we are asking something very rigorous. You don't want that, go to an exam program. It's much easier to do an exam program because nobody is going to look at you psychologically.
It is also possible to be in a school and at a certain point in time to prepare an exam on the side, and it happens for some who want to go to university or to another country. So it's not that they cannot do it, but they do it from their own movement and not because they are told that it's the only way or pushed by the parents. Yes. So there's a question here about how do they if they want to go to university, how do they do that? Well, they found their own way. If there is the necessity of having a certificate for that, they just go and get a certificate.
But let us add, Jean-Yves, that more and more are getting admission without certificates.
And yes, also.
Yes.
There is another question about the teachers. Who is teaching the teachers? Well, nobody. Because, you know, you have to find your own way. It's not that there is a technique that we transmit to the new teacher. Each teacher has to find his own personal, authentic way of how to teach in a free progress school. And because it has to be a discovery, it cannot be taught.
And the kids discover very quickly who to go to for what. They'll say, oh, you go to Jean-Yves for that, you go to Deepti for that, you go to Lola for that. The kids figure you out very well and they openly speak about which teacher to contact for what. So they're laughing about it. They're, you know, by the way, we are all called by our first name. We don't have this ma'am and sir. They relate to you as equals. And the respect, if you have it, is earned. But it is not expressed by titles and positions. So one of the speculations the kids have is, who is in charge of La School? And they love playing this game that, no, Jean-Yves is in charge. No, Lola is in charge. No. Then they figure it out that it's a team. And that's also very important because the team is very important. After all, Auroville is a collective experiment. So the team, there should not be one boss. That's the industrial age way. It's outdated.
Yeah, when the system, educational system is a recruitment for the, for the economic, for the market-oriented society, then of course there has to be a boss, there has to be a program. We are recruiting, we are kind of making the workers for different professions. This education is more human-oriented. It's where you create totally developed human beings who are capable to choose and even to make, as Manoj already mentioned in the other meeting, to make their own professions. They can create whatever they want. They don't need to choose from whatever is offered to them in the society. They create their own professions. And
Let me add that we have youngsters teaching other youngsters. If there is a student who's slightly better in a particular domain, we'll get them to do the teaching. So very quickly the kids learn that, a 15-year-old can be a teacher. You just have to have certain inclination, skill, capacity to be able to hold the class. So some of our teachers are very young and they have not got any qualification except the will to teach and the sincerity and the commitment and somehow the psychological authority to hold a group together. And we have some marvelous youngsters.
can you mention them, some of them, just names or some?
Well, Jean-Yves' daughter,
Right.
Auroville, is one of the main teachers of our school. Then there is a young man called Satyavan who, since he came to Auroville, has learned something like 8 languages. So whenever some kid wants, because we have a lot of languages in our school, we have something like 8 languages being studied. So, we catch Satyavan or teach them Russian, teach them Italian, teach them Spanish, whatever. So everybody's teaching everybody else something. And it creates a very powerful suggestion in the atmosphere, which the kids absorb as if through their skins, that they are capable, they can offer responsible work to other kids. And we help them to become in charge of something. Then we also get them to do collective activities, like when there's a festival in Auroville, there's a tango festival, they do the decorations as an offering. So this is the other thing, that you offer yourself and your work to something larger. So somebody's asking about assessments. There is constantly that kind of assessment. The more responsible you become, the more responsibility you get. And in some ways, that's what Auroville wants to create. Responsible individuals that are growing into a wider and wider space. And it's got nothing to do with age.
It's more self-assessment rather than assessment by somebody else.
Well, we do also have that assessment, but for instance, we'll ask the kids to do an installation. But that installation, art installation, will include every aspect of the being. Because if you look at all the planes and parts of the being, there is a physical component. We insist on sports. We insist on daily physical activities. That's one of our conditions, that you've got to have a physical program. But you can make it yourself. You tell us what you're doing. They can choose whatever. Then we address the whole emotional, vital center through art, through music, through poetry, through dance, through community activities, through service. And then, of course, there is the whole academic side, which has all the subjects. So Jean-Yves teaches all kinds. I mean, it's hard for us to say we are teaching that subject. So he uses English and French. I use English as the means to do psychology, sociology, philosophy, through the language. But it's everything, because knowledge is one. We have, in an artificial sense, divided it. But there is a wholeness of being that approaches knowledge in a whole fashion.
Wonderful, thank you. There is a question. Are the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother specifically studied, and in what ways, if at all?
Yes, they are studied. It depends on the demand of the student. They are not taught, but what they are explored. It's an exploration with the student. We read together. I do it for the human cycle, for instance. Deepti does it for several books of Sri Aurobindo. It's always a journey of exploration with the students, uh, sometimes of all ages. It's a kind of permanent activity in the school.
Yes. We always say we are not experts because I argue that nobody can be an expert on Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo is the future, marching towards its realization. There is no expertise, there's an exploration, and let's do that together. And it's fun because the kids can contribute also.
Right. Do you remember Kirit Joshi sitting in that in the last school with all of us, all the teachers and all the students together, learning live divine? It's kind of unimaginable anywhere in the world, all our students coming to learn from the live divine something, where the expert was Kirit Joshi. These were golden days of Auroville. Yes.
He argues that it was the best moments of his life.
It was
Because
really
there was such a ferment of a quest.
Right. There is another question here. The main problem is of teachers. Yeah, that's rather a statement. How to solve this problem? The problem of teachers.
Well, it's at the scale of the country. The question means that, I suppose, if you want to change education, you have to change the teachers. It's true, and that's a difficulty, almost the impossibility of the task. How can you change all the teachers of all the country? So it depends very much on what are the values that circulate in the society. If to be a teacher is just a job, it's hopeless. I mean, nothing will change ever. It has to be a journey. We have to change completely our way of looking at what we do and the way we live. So a job is not just a job, it's a journey, it's a self-discovery, it's a progress, and then we can create something new. Otherwise, I don't see how we can solve that. Deepti, you have a...
Yeah, I would say that there is a shortcut. Auroville is a kind of a shortcut, an acceleration. Yoga, Sri Aurobindo says, is revolutionary individual effort. Every teacher, every student has this psychic entity within. If the teacher had the confidence to look inside and seek sincerely for answers, today we live in an age where information is available at the tip of our fingers. We just go to Wikipedia or ask the question of Google and you can get the information you want. The students don't need information. They need a living exploration which the teacher has to embody. But the teacher has to go inside. It is on inner values that the outer structure can stand. And I would say that in India, it's the one country where we know this, that we are souls. We have a mind, we have a life, and we have a body. So the key, I would say, and COVID is a moment where we can find this key, is to go inside. And then no method or any method or every method which works in the moment can be used. But you have to approach it from within outwards. You have to observe, you have to listen, you have to suggest. You cannot impose. So a program that pursues success, career, and money is absolutely anti-educational. You cannot be preparing people for jobs. You have to prepare people to develop themselves and the job will come. If there's a growth of consciousness, who doesn't want you? Actually, now more and more I find business people are doing away with looking for people who passed universities. In fact, maybe the university system is obsolete already because there is a new way to discover and to know. And the way of the future is to be a self-developing soul growing in consciousness. So a teacher can do that. For heaven's sake, an adult has everything at their disposal.
You remember we had a project with Kirit Joshi on kind of writing on different personalities, on Rama And so Savitri, these books, beautiful, these golden books, for educational purposes, how to create the model, how to create the beauty of the truth embodied in some personalities, which would be very helpful for the schools. Something similar we tried to do in our university to, to bring the aspect of SOL, the science of living, all the qualities of the soul, like humility, sincerity, through literature, through examples in life, that it becomes inspirational model for the youngsters. And that can catch the fire, that aspiration within to be a greater, purer being. And that is a true joy of life, basically. There it is hiding. If we don't have that, if we are always calculative and managing, things, then of course that joy of life will not beam through. So that can be, yes, suggested to the.
Vladimir, remember what mother used to say in her school? She says, I don't want professional teachers.
Mm,
And she would tell people at 18, Aster, she told Aster to teach at 18. She says, so Aster says, what do I teach? She says, you just have to be one lesson ahead of the students.
mm,
And so it's not the subject itself, it's the living, vibrant quest that needs to be present in the teacher. And your quest will awaken the quest in somebody else. Because like in Sanskrit, we say, Jyota se Jyot. Only a Jyoti can light another Jyoti.
mm.
So you have to be a burning mystic fire. And hopefully that mystic fire will illuminate something more than just what you're doing.
That's why she said that all the teachers must be yogis. In a way, they have to do their own sadhana, their own learning, their own. And the whole idea of this free progress is so beautiful. Free progress. What can be more beautiful? They,
But we always tell the kids
mm,
that don't focus on the freedom, though freedom is the condition.
mm,
The aim is progress, but
mm,
freedom is the only condition where integral progress can happen.
wonderful.
So freedom is a condition for the progress. It's the adjective that defines the progress.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. That must be so, yes, because the progress is the aim of all this. We have to grow in consciousness, but we must have freedom to grow. And that's why we are moving into the subjective age, according to Sri Aurobindo, from our individualist age. Why that individualistic age was important? Because it created that freedom of choice, freedom to face the difficulties, face the challenges, and solve them in your own way. And then finally, we are preparing ourselves for some deeper truth, subjective or spiritual age. Would you like to say a few words about this, Jean-Yves, because it is your subject, human cycle?
Well, this is exactly what I don't want to do, is to teach about the human cycle and with any kind of authority, because it's still something I'm discovering.
Mm,
So, but I don't know.
no.
The subjective age, well, he says there was a subjective vitalism that was, when he was writing, which gave birth to these two world wars. And he was announcing a more mental subjectivism, which is, I think, the phase we are going through now, all over the world. There is a lot of attention, to yoga or to self-development, personality development. There's a lot of subjects like that are popping up. It's not still a spiritual age, but it is an opening of the mind of something more subjective and more qualitative. And it's a precondition to arrive maybe later on to a spiritual age.
But it is felt in this world, in this bigger world where I am now, it is felt this need. Everybody is looking for this deeper truth to discover, which is subjective, which is uniquely individual, so to say, to everyone. It's not enough to have this typal truth of the society where everything is kept in order. That order does not satisfy anymore. There is a need of the discovery of oneself. And that is the future. So we must address it in the educational setting.
In the human cycle, Vladimir, Sri Aurobindo gives a lot of importance. He speaks about when you're moving towards this subjectivity, failures will be numerous.
Absolutely.
And I would like to add that one of the issues with modern education is we don't value the power of failure, because failure is creative. It teaches you how not to do a thing. So if you tell the kids, if you tell the youngsters, don't be afraid of failing, try things out. Given human nature and its complexity, so what if you don't succeed the first time? I mean, law school has struggled for years. We're not highlighting all the difficulties we had. We struggled to keep alive our experiment. Today, as Jean-Yves says, there's a kind of a settled atmosphere, I hope, and I hope a succession also that will follow after we've stopped teaching, to create a way of being that is not afraid to go into those troughs of not knowing sometimes. It's all right not to know, but you have to keep aspiring to know, and you will arrive there.
Yeah. And it's always good to know that you don't know, and to value that not knowing, and to a certain extent, because that creates the space for knowing, and this knowledge will come. Yes. Not to be afraid not to know is very important, and not to pretend to know, not to try to be knowledgeable one in the eyes of the others. Yes. There are a few questions more here. How do you assess students' progress and performance? One more question, and one more. Can this kind of teaching be introduced in general governmental schools? Well,
Listen, Kirit Bhai, you mentioned Kirit Bhai, he was the Special Secretary Education. He helped to formulate the earlier education policy, which now has been changed a little bit. He used to always argue that mother wanted il faut généraliser, this free progress. So he used to always tell me, keep talking about these names. This is the future for India. And I think it is the future for India because India knows the inner dimension. A little child in a village school, you look at the eyes of these youngsters, they're awake, they're alive, they're full of energy and aspiration. In fact, the traditional schooling kills that. So let's not repeat the cycle of industrial age education. Let's leap straight into the future. There is a possibility. And I absolutely think it can be generalized.
thank you. Right, thank you very much. Jean-Yves, would you like to add something to this? Yeah.
Oh, there was a question about the last question. Parents who want to give a progressive education to their children, but at the stage of secondary school, there is a need to have the certificate, and they don't know what to do. And there was an anxiety, I mean, to go mainstream or not to go mainstream. It's difficult to find a solution here because the school corresponds always to the society where it is embedded. So it depends where you are going to live, where the students, in Auroville, we are very privileged because students can come out of a free progress system, find their own way. Nobody is going to ask a paper for them. And they can go and find their place and their activity. But in the outside world, it would be more difficult. So I don't know what is the answer for that kind of universal answer valid for everybody. Each family and each student also has to make a conscious choice, as conscious as possible. That's what I can say. I don't know, Deepti, how you would approach that.
I trust that if you don't fear, And if you trust your child and you give the child an all-round education, I trust that if you, mother says, if you're a light, there is room for you in the world. So trust your children, but educate them. No, they must, you cannot just float around, because mother says after the age of 14, if people remain ignorant, their life becomes fickle and inexpressive. So definitely there has to be a program of learning. But today there are lots of online courses. Many of our local kids do National Open School. They do it independently. They come to school. Then the French baccalaureate, you can do it again as a external student. And also, if one day you decide that you want to get a certificate, well, you can very quickly get that certificate, because if your mental instrument is refined and complex and capable of synthesis, it's just a few techniques to learn the passing of exams. So again, I'm confident that that is not an issue unless it is an issue.
Right.
And then, as Jean-Yves says, if it's an issue, then you have to go through with it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. It was wonderful to see you, to hear about these topics again. They are very refreshing, and of course, the challenge of the transition from one type of society to another is still here. So it's not an easy solution for kids in the normal society to grow. They have to find the hybrid system, so to say, to be educated at home, maybe in free time, more in the right way, and the school will be just providing certain kind of skills and look at it as more instrumental rather than holistic education. So the education has to continue at home, day and night, so to say. And then it will give some results. Thank you very much, and I hope to meet with you again. And
Yes, sure.
You know that today is the first day of the Devi Pujas.
right,
Navratras, I had said we should mention that. So it's a very auspicious day. We are meeting around the power of the energy of the Universal Mother.
Om Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Matrirupena Sanstita Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Shaktirupena Sanstita Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Shantirupena Sanstita Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. Om Namo Namaha. Shri Mirambikayai. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Aravindaya. Om Namo Namaha Shri Mirambikayai. Shri Aravinda Sharanam Mama. Thank you very much, and let us meet again. Okay, all the best. Namaste.
All the best. Namaste, everyone.